I would like to open the discussion. If you have any question or comments.
I've got two questions to Mickey and two to Julia. I'll start with Mickey. I just published about 2 years ago a small paper saying that there is a difference in early Zionism, in non-religious Zionism, between two versions. One is the what is attributed to Herzl, meaning we want a state in Israel, and this corresponds very much to the "your country calls you," which was a famous slogan in the First World War. By the way, if you read the edict there, it's very, very important. If you could upload it again, I'll try to explain it in a second. The other version was that there were Jews immigrating to America, immigrating to other places that didn't become a part of the new place, were already drawn away from the old place they came from. They're not Russian anymore, they're not English yet. And during the First World War, those people began to think maybe Zionism is a solution for the question of my identity. It's not a political issue, it's another thing. The other point I want to make is maybe there is a reason why they put the documents in such a place. The two people most associated with those legends were Trumpeldor and Jabotinsky. Even though they were not important, Peterson was more important than others. But now, if you look at Jabotinsky, he is not one of the people that is accepted in Israeli politics in the 50s, 60s, 70s. But also Trumpeldor, even though he's associated with the issue of the high and other stuff, still is not a social Zionist, is not a Mapainik, if you want to call it. So maybe this is the reason they put it in maybe politics has to do with it. And you are a political science, you know about it. So that's basically my questions. And
well, I don't know if they are questions. I think they are just very useful comments. On the one hand, yes, we did focus not on the political, but on the psychological, on the matter of consciousness. But it was, again, we, of course, in the book and in the articles and so on, we got much deeper into it. The point was also not just that they didn't feel Russian, or they remember that those who came from Russia objected to the war on the side of Tsarist Russia, right? So they refused to actually join the call for Jews to, you know, the Jews in the First World War fought in much larger numbers larger percentages than others, but these Jews we are talking about were young immigrants who were still concerned with their family income. They, you know, when the general recruitment took place, many of them were Orthodox, which means that they couldn't join the army. You know, as they said in the Second World War, they couldn't eat M for Uncle Sam, and they were also, but they were basically loners in a way. While the whole all the youth in the world was now fighting this great war. And when the Jewish Legion's recruiters came and told them, you can now fight for the Holy Land as Jews, that appeal to them in terms of their own consciousness. So you are very right on that. Yeah. And I think you mentioned Peterson. I always say in so many lectures that, we have all these Allenby streets in Israel, but we hardly have a Peterson street. So now we actually managed to bring Peterson's ashes to Israel. I don't know if you know.
I know. I heard about it.
But his contribution to the
he's the founder. He's the real founder of the.
Of the Zion Mule Corps.
The Mule, yeah.
But and then he was the commander of the legions. And again, there is lots to say about it.
Well, we'll find time to talk about it in the college. So.
Sorry?
Yeah. We'll find time to talk about it in the college.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but the poster you brought, come and join us. Of course, it's based on the American country calls you.
Oh, yeah.
But the wording in Yiddish are important.
Yes.
Your old new land calls you. Yes. That's what your old new, and now it takes the word of Herzl Altneuland, but it put it in a different perspective. So it's very interesting to read it Yiddish-wise.
Yes. Yes, Chaim, you are very right. Let me only say that this was, remember, the American poster started from Kitchener.
I know.
Was the one who actually
of course, for English.
So it was very interesting that they put this daughter of Bat Zion from Megillat Eicha, Kitchener, yeah. And that was for English recruits, this poster. Alt-Neuland darf ich haben. That's what it says.
Yeah. Actually, it says you ein, meaning you all new land needs you. Basically, it's almost translating it from the
book of Eicha, yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. Now I've got actually two. One is a question, one is a note to Julia. I use also the Ma'amad papers, but nearly 70 years later. I was very puzzled by something that is very peculiar in Anglo-Jewish history. We all, of course, know Moses Montefiore, the great benefactor. He had a brother, Horatio. And this brother in 1844 with some other Ashkenazi Jews opened up the first Sephardi Ashkenazi synagogue, which was, they regarded it as a Reform synagogue, but it was not really a Reform synagogue. So, and they threw Horatio out of the Ma'amad, because even though you're the brother of Moses Montefiore, the most important man in Shara Shemaim and in the organization of Sephardi and English Jews, they threw him out. Another thing that I think is more important in your talk, Todd Endelman told me once that he thinks that about 25% of the Yechidim in the 18th century converted. But even though they converted, they stayed within the organization. So I think that at least some of the stuff you brought, I don't know if it's 25%, I think he exaggerated, but a very big proportion of the leaders of Anglo Jewry in the 18th century either married Christians or become Christians themselves. And this is a thing that still has to be investigated.
Right. Around the turn of the 1800s, the number of those rejecting Judaism increased. And the tone also changes. Then they are very polite and they just say, I leave the congregation, but I'm, and they don't need
I want to be
buried.
yeah.
But they do leave the congregation.
Yeah.
Because I think it was very difficult to remain in that congregation because they were so strict, you know, with their rules and things like that. I don't know, you know, I mean, I respect his work a great deal.
I think I agree.
But he never
took
the bother to even have the translations.
Yeah.
Of
No,
some
no.
of the...
He said that in a past talking with me. He didn't write it, but he said that this is. If he had proof, he would have written it. He didn't have any proofs, but I think the number of people who converted within the Jewish community in England is much higher than we think, and it needs to be investigated.
Right. It just there are not many studies on the 1800s, which is kind of interesting. I don't know if it has to do with.
Well, there is a guy by Margaliot who did a lot to
Right. I have read some things, but
yeah.
But the community did evolve. It's the only community that survived to today. You know, it's a vibrant community today. It's no longer the Sephardic, you know, community.
It is, but I claim, I wrote it in my dissertation many years ago.
Oh, really?
Even though it was a Sephardi organization, it was ruled by Ashkenazis. I claim that Moses Montefiore brought Rabbi Nathan Adler to be the chief of the Jewish community, the rabbi of the Jewish community, to put down the role of the Shara Shamayim. But people disagree with me, so let's...
May I ask a question for Madeleine?
Sure, of course.
Yeah. I don't know if it may not be a legitimate question, or I don't know if you know, but the only two people who escaped Auschwitz were Rudolf Verba.
Verba.
Now, I met Rudolf Verba in 1987, and he told me, which I didn't know, that he's actually his contact was with the Slovakian underground. Did you ever come across of that? Because I understand that he actually told them the whole story, and the Slovakian underground submitted it to Geneva, and nothing, and somehow on the way it got lost. So do you have any insights on that?
I do, actually. The two men in April 7th, 1944, Rudolf Verba and Josef Wetzler, escaped from Auschwitz. They had this incredibly daring plan. They hid under some wooden planks, and they put the tobacco on top of the planks to throw off the scent of the dogs, and then they went over the mountains between Poland and Slovakia, and they wound up in Žilina. And when they found the Jewish community in Žilina, nobody there wanted to believe them about the horrors that they had seen in Auschwitz. And they separated the two men. They put them in separate rooms and asked them to write what they saw. And the two stories matched, and they simply couldn't believe the kind of horror that these two men were talking about. They wrote something called the Auschwitz Protocol. It's about a 22-page document that they had collected. Amazingly, they had collected information from all over the camp. And it was the very first comprehensive document to describe what was going on there. And the document took a very convoluted, very slow path. They had hoped that the Hungarian Jews would not be deported thanks to the document, because they were preparing more crematory or more facilities, because the Hungarians were coming, and Hungarian Jews, and they had hoped somehow that their document could put a stop to it, that they would warn people not to go to the deportations. It turned out very differently. It did go to Switzerland. It took months to get to the United States. And when it got to the United States, it had been like dismembered somehow. It didn't come as a whole document. There was some anti-Semitism in the United States State Department, and there were some concerns about making the information public. There had been a Polish man named Witold Pilecki who had written reports to the Polish government in exile in London, and they said this material is too unbelievable, and they filed it away. And so it was very hard to get the information out. Josef Wetzlar stayed in Slovakia, and he was subjected to censorship, and he couldn't really talk about his experiences. But Verba went to London, and then he went to Canada, and he had access to Western historians, Western journalists, and they both wrote their memoirs after the Frankfurt Auschwitz trials in the early 60s, and the two memoirs are completely different. One was writing under censorship, and he made a literary response for his memoir, and Verba wrote more of a memoir and because he was in the West, he was more free to do so. That's a long answer to a short question.
Who in Slovakia did they meet? The Jewish community or the I thought he said the Slovakian underground, which was not Jewish.
There was one Jewish institution in Slovakia that was allowed to exist. In English, it would be translated as the Jewish Center. And it was an arm of the Slovak government, and it was there to do the bidding of the Slovak government, which also included things like deportations. Within that organization, there was something called the Working Group, and they were Jews who tried they actually tried to get the cooperation of Eichmann, but they couldn't. They wanted to raise money, and they weren't able to do that. Named Gizzy Fleischmanova Gizzy Fleischman was one of the members of that group. They met with that underground, which was Jewish, but it was working ostensibly under the Ministry of the Interior. So they tried to help, and they were unsuccessful, obviously. It's a sad history.
I think that there is a connection between what happened in Hungary and what happened in Slovakia. Not only that Bratislava used to be Pressburg, meaning that the Hungarian city, but also you mentioned the dates, and the German invaded Hungary only in 1944. So you could see that even before they came and conquered Hungary, it's basically a similar system, meaning that you've got anti-Semitic group ruling the country. And so you could see a lot of points that are similar in those two places.
Eichmann only had like 50 SS in Budapest at the time, and something conceivably could have been done to avoid those deportations. I think everybody in Israel, or a lot of people, know about Kastner.
Of course. And
the case with Kastner and all of the controversies surrounding that, and the train and everything else like that. It's a very, very sad history. Verba and Wetzlar really did hope that they could stop the deportations of Hungarian Jews, but they know that they didn't succeed because those trains used to cross Slovak territory right near where they were staying on their way to Auschwitz. It must have been very frustrating for them because they put themselves at so much risk. Obviously, they wanted to save themselves as well. And two other people escaped from Auschwitz later. And I'm blanking out on the names. One was Mordovich, I think, and he actually wound up going to Auschwitz twice. And his story is very dramatic, but it's not widely known, even though he met with Verba and Wetzlar and had some meetings with the papal nuncio there, because Mordovich spoke French and Verba did not, and they were afraid it was a trap. But when Mordovich was sent back to Auschwitz, he either cut off his number or he chewed it off. And it's a very, very dramatic story. One thing that will never be clear to me is why they didn't tell this story. The Russians were a lot closer. The Soviets were a lot closer geographically, where they felt that this information needed to go first and foremost to the West, where it was very difficult to get it there. And the Russians were right. They were headed right toward them. So there's a lot still that remains to be researched on that.
I think the main reason was that they knew what the Russians did to the Poles in Warsaw.
Okay, that would explain a lot of it. So, yeah, no, that makes complete sense.
So they didn't trust them to do anything. I mean, they shouldn't have trusted the West either, but that's a difference.
Right, the West let them down as well.
Yeah.
Everyone let them down.
Yeah. Hey, Ronen, I want to ask.
Okay.
Thank you. I would just like to add that eventually the Auschwitz protocols of Wetzlar and Verbe do reach Father Roncalli, Angelo Roncalli, who is the Vatican ambassador to Turkey. And it may not save the Hungarian Jews, but it does save the Bulgarian Jews, because Roncalli has influence on King Boris. And King Boris sees these protocols, and he decides not to give the 50,000 Jews to, so it travels, these documents travels.
It's really interesting, and I know that he made a lot of public statements about how wrong this all was. And I know that I mentioned that the Slovak government, they paid 500 Reichsmarks for deported Jews. The Germans tried to make the same deal with the Bulgarians, and the Bulgarians said, no, we're not going to pay.
Yeah. By the
Very
way,
interesting.
Father Roncalli receives the protocols from Gezi Fleischmann's partner, which is
Weissmandel or
Weissmandel.
Rabbi
Weissmandel.
So it makes its way to Bulgaria.
It was an amazing document. When I read it, I was amazed at how close they were statistically to some of the murderous activities that were going on in the camp. They really researched, and they even managed to speak with Sonderkommando.
Yeah.
Amazing. Oh, thank you for that. I'm going to look more into that.
Okay. Any more? I've got something that relates.
I have a question to Mickey. Maybe I'm wrong, and if I'm wrong, please correct me. But I heard throughout your lecture that you put on one side the cultural heritage, and on the other side, nationalistic ideology. But if they came from because of their cultural heritage and the history, isn't it part of the nationalism? This is the משפחה מורחבת, קבוצת שאירים מורחבת. I don't know in English.
Large family.
Yeah, so it's not.
It's a good question, yeah, but let me, you know, again, you know, you can't put it all in 20 minutes, but, you know, I'll send you, if I haven't done so yet, a recent article of ours in which we are discussing the way in which the 38th Fusiliers, Royal Fusiliers, and the 39th, in other words, the foreigners, were treated by the 40th. The 40th were recruited in Palestine. You know, they included, just when I said the 40th Royal Fusiliers, it sounds so British, but the people who joined it were Berl Katznelson, Levi Eshkol, Rabin's father, you know, the Yishuv, basically. And, you know, you can't imagine how they treated the Jewish legionnaires. We found now we looked for it and we found in the military archives, IDF archives, very interesting documents which we continue to work on. We just published an article in Alei Zait Vacherev about the way in which they were treated. You can't imagine. For example, there was a demand that Yiddish not be spoken in the British military camp. You know, when they found themselves in the same camp with the ideological Zionists, you know, there started the whole language war between them. And it was so interesting, you know, some of these British soldiers were some of them were real laborers, you know, they were very simple soldiers. So these guys who never held a hammer in their hand, you know, the socialists in the 40th kind of despised them for not being able to, for not being socialists. So you are right that from a political philosophical perspective, obviously Zionist ideology has its cultural and religious sources, but historically,
I totally disagree. Totally. I think that within Zionism, you could see from the very beginning two kinds of Zionism that politically merge together, nothing to do with each other. You've got the political Zionism run by Herzl and later even Jabotinsky and others, which had its European and nationalistic sources, and then you've got the what we call sort of religious, not always religious Zionism, that is basically religious Zionism as we know it, and a fraction of what Echad Ha'am did. My claim is that Echad Ha'am is not a Zionist at all. He's an autonomist, part of the people that went around the North and the Bund, and you have to see him differently. If you wish, I could send you a paper that, and I totally disagree with the idea that Zionism at the beginning, all of them had the same issues, were talking about the same thing. I totally disagree.
Okay, no, that's a long conversation which we'll not hold now. I like, for example, I wanted to show you a picture and then I decided not to. Actually, just today, I hope I deleted it from my presentation of Yitzhak Sadeh, you know, the legendary commander of the Palmach, standing with Yigael Alon on one side and Moshe Dayan on the other. Remember
the famous one, yeah.
And you know, one of the things that people never realize is that Yitzhak Sadeh spoke Yiddish.
Of course.
He was not the posture kid we are. In other words, our study, and again, you should have a look at the entire book, because our study shows through these ego documents how much Zionism came out of that negotiation, as I phrased it, between the present experience and the past upbringing. So you are right when you are making these, when you are putting Zionism into categories: political Zionism, socialist Zionism, Echad Ha'am Zionism. Yes, I agree with you 100%. But this is, I think, where our ego documents allowed us to make to nuance those categories.
Because if you look at the history of Zionism in places that immigrated came to, like England, like the States, you could see that certain versions of Zionism were accepted. Others were not. It's not only Echad Ha'am and vice versa the others, it's much more complicated, because the state of immigration, when you immigrate, when you come to a new culture, to a new place, and you are not within the new place, you are on your way. You are not sure that you will be accepted. You've got certain states of mind that you look for your identity. And actually Zionism for me is looking for a Jewish identity in times of upheaval, when you are hated because there are anti-Semitism, where you have political issues, we've got economic issues. the main reason for going from Russia to America in the early 20th century is economic, not other. People emigrated from Russia, not from the places that they were hunted. They immigrated from the places that they had no way of making a living. Right. So you could look at those people that are going from one place because they were thrown out of it, coming to a new place that maybe they've got a chance to make a sort of a living, but they don't identify with the new place yet. They are not yet American. And in this time, Buddhism on one end, Zionism on the other end are very, very important to finding out your identity. And here comes the war, the Great War. And within it, that's the way you need to look about the period.
Yes. No, you are right, especially Chaim, about one thing that it's very complicated and very nuanced. Because, for example, you know, this guy Lis, whose diary, you know, consisted of 23 books, basically. For example, one of the interesting things in reading his diaries is that he develops, as he is part of the Jewish legions on the way to the Promised Land, again, through Nova Scotia and then the oceans and Egypt and the Sinai, etc. He develops not just a Zionist, he doesn't develop a Zionist ideology in any way we are familiar with that term, or as you define it here, but an American ideology. For example, he demands of the British authorities to allow him to celebrate the 4th of July. You see, so they also become better American Jews, not just better Zionists in this regard. So it's that's why we called it authentic or existential Zionism, which is not the same as
I totally agree with your distinction. I agree with
already an achievement.
I'm not sure that I'm such an authority to be.
I think you should continue in the call.
We have to save our souls for a few minutes, and we are going to meet.
Okay, thank you so much.
6 minute time for the rest of it. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.